The sun hung low over the village as the soft orange glow painted the horizon. In the midst of this serene beauty, the young woman sat on a stone bench beneath the shade of a grand mango tree, her mind wandering. Her name was Amina, and she lived a life many would envy. She was beautiful, intelligent, and loved by all who knew her. Her father, a wealthy and respected merchant, had built a name for himself through hard work and shrewd dealings. He provided for Amina with everything she could ever desire. Amina was no stranger to luxury. Her home was a grand structure with intricate carvings on the walls, sprawling gardens, and rooms filled with fine silks and delicate trinkets from distant lands. Her mother, though now gone, had been a prominent figure in the village, a woman known for her grace, wisdom, and generosity. Amina often wondered what her life might have been like had her mother still been alive to guide her. But that was a thought she had buried deep, for in her place there was now her stepmother, Farida. Farida, a woman of sharp wit and subtle manipulations, had become the dominant figure in Amina's life. Though her father loved Amina dearly, Farida wielded the power in the household. Over time, Amina had come to understand that her stepmother saw her as nothing more than a pawn in her own quest for more power and control. It was under Farida's influence that Amina's life was about to change forever. One evening, as the evening meal was being served, Amina's father, Ibrahim, who had always been gentle and kind, sat with a solemn expression. Beside him, Farida's eyes gleamed with an unreadable emotion. "Amina," her father said gently, "there is a matter we must discuss." His tone was calm, but there was a heaviness to his words. Amina's heart skipped a beat. "What is it, father?" Farida leaned forward, her voice smooth yet firm. "You are to marry." Amina's pulse quickened. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of an inevitable future. "Who?" Amina asked, her voice trembling despite her best efforts to remain composed. "His name is Idris. He is a man of humble means, with no wealth or status to speak of. But he is a good man, and his family has offered a suitable alliance," Farida explained, her eyes gleaming with something Amina could not place. Amina stared at her father, her heart sinking. "But why? I don't know him. I don't even—" "Amina, it's for the good of the family," her father interrupted. "This is a decision we have made together. Farida and I believe this union will bring prosperity." Amina's mind spun. A marriage to a man she had never met. One without wealth, without the status she had grown accustomed to. It didn't make sense. But the authority in her father's voice and the cold certainty in her stepmother's eyes told her this was not a matter up for discussion. "But father," Amina protested, "I don't want this. I want to choose who I marry." Farida's voice cut through her words like a sharp blade. "You will marry him, Amina. You have no choice. Your father and I have decided. This is the way things must be." Amina's world felt like it was falling apart. The very foundation of her life, the comfort, the control, was being ripped from her hands. There was no room for negotiation, no space for her desires. She was a pawn in her family's grand design. In that moment, she realized how little control she had over her own life. She could feel the weight of tradition pressing down on her shoulders, an invisible force too powerful to fight. The village, her father's reputation, the expectations, all of it was greater than her own will. Her protests were met with silence, and as the evening wore on, Amina was left to stew in her thoughts. Her future, it seemed, had already been decided for her. and she could only watch helplessly as her life was reshaped by forces beyond her control. The night stretched on in a suffocating silence, and Amina, unable to sleep, lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought of the man she was supposed to marry, Idris, a poor man with no wealth to offer. What kind of future could she have with someone like him? Yet a nagging question lingered in her mind. Who was he really? Why had her stepmother insisted so strongly on this marriage? But the answers to these questions seemed far out of reach, buried beneath layers of expectation and tradition. And so, as the night deepened, Amina resigned herself to a fate she had no power to change. She was bound to a future she had not chosen, to a man she had never met, and to a life that seemed more like a story she had never wanted to be a part of. This introduction sets the tone for the rest of the story. It provides background on the protagonist's life, the manipulative role of the stepmother, and the forced marriage she must accept, setting up the conflict and emotional struggle that will unfold as the plot progresses. The day of the wedding arrived, and the village was alive with anticipation. The grand hall was draped in vibrant cloths, golden lanterns hanging from every corner, casting warm, flickering lights over the gathering. The rich and influential members of the village had all come to witness the union, their faces painted with excitement and curiosity. Music echoed through the halls, and the scent of freshly prepared feasts lingered in the air. The guests, dressed in their finest silks and jewels, spoke in hushed tones, casting occasional glances toward the bride, who stood at the centre of it all. Amina, in her ornate wedding gown, felt more like a statue than a woman. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she kept her face stoic, her eyes trained on the ground as she stood before the altar. Her father was there, proud and beaming, but there was no warmth in his gaze, just a cold, distant approval. Farida, her stepmother, stood nearby, a smile that was too sharp for comfort on her lips. Amina's thoughts drifted elsewhere, to the man standing beside her. Idris, the man she was to marry. He was nothing like the men she had imagined marrying. Dressed in simple, worn clothing, he looked out of place in such a lavish setting. Yet there was something about his presence, an air of quiet dignity, as though he didn't belong, but knew he had no choice but to be there. His dark eyes, though gentle, held a depth she couldn't quite decipher. His face was not one of arrogance, nor of timidity, but of someone who carried the weight of burdens unseen. As the ceremony unfolded, Amina's mind swirled in confusion. How could her life have come to this? Here she was, surrounded by wealth and luxury, about to marry a man with nothing but his quiet demeanour to offer her. His sincerity was undeniable, but sincerity alone could not fill the emptiness she felt inside. He stood beside her, unmoving, a stranger to her in every way. The vows were exchanged, but they felt hollow, a formality that neither of them truly embraced. Amina's thoughts were far from the moment, her emotions tangled in the web of her forced fate. The night descended, and the guests slowly began to leave, their laughter and chatter fading as the day's excitement wound down. The newlyweds were escorted to their private quarters, a small, modest room far from the opulence of the wedding hall. The air was thick with an awkward tension. Amina sat at the edge of the bed, her eyes casting down to avoid her husband's gaze. She didn't know what to say to him. The silence between them was almost suffocating. Idris finally spoke, his voice soft but steady. "This is your new life now," he said, not as an instruction, but as an observation. There was a calmness to his words, as if he had said them 100 times before, but with no resentment, only an understanding of the gravity of the situation. Amina, still struggling with the reality of it all, looked at him for the first time, really looked at him. His eyes weren't filled with the hunger or ambition she had expected. Instead, there was a quiet strength, a peacefulness that contrasted sharply with her own inner turmoil. "I didn't ask for this," she muttered, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't know why she was telling him, or why she felt a strange sense of comfort in speaking her truth. "I didn't either," he replied, his gaze never leaving hers. His words were simple, but they carried an unspoken weight. The quiet lingered between them, and though Amina felt trapped in this marriage, a small part of her recognized something in him that was different from anyone she had known. It was a quiet strength, not overpowering, but steady. He didn't try to convince her or change her mind. He simply accepted the situation. But there was something more, a sense of mystery about him, an unspoken truth. He wasn't just a poor man, was he? Amina could sense that, though he said little, there was much more beneath the surface. She couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something that could change everything. She didn't know what that truth was, or why he kept it hidden. But as she lay there in the quiet darkness, a single question gnawed at her. What was his real story? Her new husband, the poor man who had nothing to offer but his sincerity, was more than he appeared to be. And Amina, for the first time, felt a spark of curiosity. And perhaps, despite everything, a flicker of hope. The first few days of married life were nothing like Amina had imagined. Gone were the grand halls of her father's estate, the silken sheets, and the lavish banquets. In their place stood a small, humble home on the outskirts of the village. The house was modest, with simple wood furniture and clay walls, its roof thatched with dry grass. It lacked the comforts and luxuries Amina had grown up with, and every corner reminded her of the life she had been torn from. The silence in the home was deafening. There was no bustling servant staff to tend to every need, no rich tapestries hanging from the walls. It was just her and Idris in this tiny space that felt so much smaller than the mansion she once called home. Each morning, she woke to the sound of birds calling in the distance and the smell of fresh earth. The simple tasks, cooking, cleaning, tending the small garden outside, were far from the life of luxury she had once known. Amina couldn't help but feel trapped in this unfamiliar world. Her clothes were no longer elaborate silks, but rough-spun linen that itched against her skin. The once proper young lady, who had been accustomed to being waited on, was now doing everything herself. At first, frustration was her constant companion. The smell of the fresh bread she used to have baked for her in the finest ovens now seemed bitter. The food was simple, far less than what she had grown used to, and every meal felt like a reminder of the life she had been forced to leave behind. As she swept the dirt floor of their small home, resentment churned in her stomach. She couldn't help but blame her father, who had so easily handed her over to a man she didn't know, a man with no wealth, no status, nothing but his words. And Farida, her stepmother, she felt only bitterness toward her. It was as if her entire life had been a game to them, and she was the pawn. But as the days went by, she tried to make the best of it. She couldn't fight her situation forever, and she refused to let her unhappiness consume her. Idris, however, remained the constant in her life. He never once complained. His demeanor was calm and steady, unaffected by the changes around him. He didn't seem to mind the lack of wealth nor the simple nature of their life. He was quietly content, and it infuriated Amina. It was as if he was too perfect, too calm, too serene. Every time she watched him, she saw something in his quiet movements that unsettled her. He was skilled in everything. He could fix anything, whether it was the rickety wooden chair or the leaky roof. He worked with his hands, carving intricate designs into wood, building furniture, even making pottery. But it wasn't just his craftsmanship that intrigued her. It was the way he seemed to know things he shouldn't. One morning, while she worked in the garden, he had spoken of the best way to harvest the herbs, mentioning specific plants that she had never seen before, plants that weren't common in their village. How did he know of them? And when the two of them ventured into the village one afternoon, Amina overheard him give advice to a group of traders about the best route to take for selling goods in a nearby town. The advice was astoundingly accurate, and the traders listened to him with respect. Amina, who had grown up around merchants and traders, had never heard such authority in a voice so quiet and unassuming. It was little things like this that made her question him more and more. Who was he really? How did a poor man like him know so much about the world? There were times when she felt she could catch him in a lie, but then he would look at her with those deep, quiet eyes, and it was as though he was reading her thoughts. Her curiosity grew. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, a crisis hit the village. A large herd of wild cattle, panicked and confused, had broken through the village's outer fences, charging through the fields and destroying crops. The villagers ran in a frenzy, trying to herd the cattle back, but their efforts only made the situation worse. It was chaos. Amina rushed to the front door, watching helplessly as the scene unfolded. She could hear the distant shouting and the pounding of hooves growing nearer. That's when she saw Idris. Without hesitation, he grabbed a thick rope and rushed out toward the frenzied herd. His movements were deliberate, calm, and precise. He shouted commands, his voice cutting through the chaos with a force that demanded attention. The villagers stopped, momentarily stunned by his authority. Idris worked swiftly, using his experience to guide the cattle toward a more open field, away from the crops. He was no longer the humble, quiet man she had married. He was a leader, a man who knew exactly what to do, and he did it without question. Amina watched in awe. She saw his strength, both physical and mental, as he stood at the front, guiding the wild animals with nothing but his calm presence. When the herd finally veered off course, the villagers cheered, and for the first time, Amina saw Idris in a completely new light. This wasn't the poor man she had thought he was. He wasn't a simple craftsman or a humble husband. He had an inner strength that could command not just cattle, but people, and it was something she had never expected. As they walked back to their home that evening, Amina remained silent, lost in thought. She had witnessed something extraordinary, and the admiration she had felt for him grew. This man, who had been nothing more than a stranger to her just days ago, was more than just a husband. He was someone with hidden potential, someone capable of greatness. For the first time since their marriage, Amina began to wonder what else Idris was hiding. What other secrets did he carry? And more importantly, what did he see in her that made him marry a woman like her? The questions lingered, but Amina was no longer filled with resentment. Instead, she felt a deep curiosity, an undeniable pull to learn more about the man she had been forced to marry and the life he had yet to reveal to her. It was the kind of day when the air felt thick with unspoken words, when the sun seemed to hang low and heavy, casting long shadows across the village. Amina could feel it, the shift that had been coming for days. The mystery that had hung around Idris like a shadow was finally starting to peel away, layer by layer, but she wasn't sure if she was ready for what lay beneath. Over the past few weeks, Amina had noticed even more strange things about Idris. More whispered conversations, more quiet exchanges with travelers who recognized him, more moments when he would step away into the dark corners of their small home, his expression clouded with thoughts he would not share. It wasn't that he was hiding from her. He was simply hiding something deeper than she could reach. That evening, after a particularly long and tiring day, Idris returned late from the village. He was always the first to rise and the last to return. The simple tasks that kept their home running were all on his shoulders, and Amina had long stopped protesting. She was used to the quiet, to the heavy silence between them that always seemed to thrum with unasked questions. But tonight, as she sat by the hearth, a strange feeling settled in her chest. Her curiosity, her need to know the truth, had reached its peak. She could no longer ignore the questions that had been growing inside her. When Idris stepped through the door, his face was drawn, his eyes tired. But there was something in his expression, a kind of knowing, that made her heart race. "Amina," he began, his voice soft but steady. "There's something I must tell you." The words hung in the air like a weight, and Amina's pulse quickened. She had waited for this moment, for him to finally reveal his truth. But as she looked into his eyes, she saw not just a man who had been hiding his past, but a man who had been carrying a burden far heavier than she could imagine. He sat across from her, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I wasn't always a poor man, Amina. I was born into a noble family, one with great wealth and power. My father was a king, a ruler of a distant land, a place full of riches and untold influence. But my family's story isn't one of happiness or peace. It's a tale of betrayal, of greed, and of curses that haunt our bloodline." Amina blinked, unable to fully comprehend what he was saying. A king, a noble family. She had thought Idris was a simple man, a poor craftsman, a humble husband, but this was something entirely different. "There was a great dispute within my family," he continued, his voice carrying a tinge of sorrow. "A power struggle that tore us apart. A curse was placed upon me, one that made it dangerous for me to stay in that world. I had to leave Amina. My life was in danger. Those who wanted my position, my wealth, were willing to kill for it. So I fled. I left behind everything I had ever known, everything I had ever loved, to protect myself. I lived in the shadows, in poverty, in order to survive." The weight of his words hit Amina like a tidal wave. The man she had married, the man who had quietly worked beside her, who had seemed so humble and unassuming, was no common man at all. He was royalty. He was the heir to a kingdom, a ruler who had given up everything for his life. Her mind struggled to process it. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked, her voice strained, a mixture of anger and confusion flooding her chest. "Why hide this from me? All this time you've kept the truth from me." Idris looked at her, his gaze steady, but filled with an understanding she hadn't expected. "I didn't want to burden you, Amina. I didn't want to complicate things between us. I didn't want you to feel that you were part of a world so dangerous, so full of betrayal. You were meant to be free, to live without the shadows of my past hanging over you. But I see now that I cannot keep running from who I am, nor can I keep you in the dark. The time has come for you to know the truth." He paused, his hands tightening on his lap. I didn't marry you out of obligation or for any political reason. I married you because I believe you are a part of my destiny, Amina. There is a reason why we are together. You were meant to be by my side, not just as my wife, but as someone who will share in the responsibility that comes with the throne. I have waited for this moment, for this time when I would return to my rightful place. And I believe you are the key to everything. Together, we will reclaim what is rightfully mine, and yours as well. Amina's breath caught in her throat. The weight of his words was almost unbearable. She had married a man who was not just a craftsman or a poor husband, but someone with a birthright, someone whose fate was bound to a kingdom, a throne, and a future that could change everything. I don't know if I can be part of that, Amina whispered, the words escaping her lips before she could stop them. I don't know if I can be a part of your world. She looked at him, her heart torn between the life she had known, the life she had left behind, and this new reality that was so far beyond her understanding. She had been angry at him, frustrated by his silence. But now, as the truth unfolded before her, she felt a deep sense of sadness, a sadness for the life she had lost and for the future that seemed so uncertain. I don't want to drag you into my past, Idris said quietly, his voice heavy with regret. But the truth is, my past is also your future. The choice is yours, Amina. You can stay with me by my side and help me rebuild what was lost. Or you can walk away, return to the life you once knew, and leave everything behind. For the first time, Amina saw the full weight of the man before her. Idris wasn't just a husband. He was a man with a destiny, one that would either rise or fall based on the choices they made together. Her heart was torn. On one hand, she felt betrayed, the life she had known slipping further away. But on the other hand, she could see the depth of his sacrifice, the life he had abandoned, the safety he had traded for his own freedom. She wasn't sure what her future held, but one thing was clear. She could no longer stay in the shadows of her past. The world had shifted, and so too must she. I'll stay, Amina said, her voice barely above a whisper, but the words carried the weight of a decision that would change everything. Idris looked at her, a flicker of hope in his eyes. Together, they would face the future, whatever it held, and the kingdom would soon know the truth of its heir, the man who had returned to reclaim what was rightfully his. And by his side, Amina would stand, not just as a wife, but as a partner in a destiny neither of them had expected. The tension between Amina and her family had been growing since Idris's revelation. It wasn't long before her stepmother, Farida, and her father arrived at their humble home, their faces grim and filled with anger. The air crackled with a charged silence as they stood at the door, looking down at Amina as if she were a disappointment. Her father's face was stern, but his eyes, tired from years of ruling over his household, betrayed the unease he felt at having to confront his daughter. Amina, Farida's voice cut through the silence, sharp and demanding. This life is beneath you. You were meant for more than this man. Her words spat out like venom, each one a reminder of the wealth and luxury that Amina had left behind. Amina felt a knot tighten in her stomach, but she stood her ground, refusing to be moved by their words. This is my life now, she said quietly, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. I've chosen it. Her father's eyes hardened. You will return home with us. You will leave this place, this man, behind. If you refuse, we will disown you. You will no longer be part of this family. Amina's heart wrenched. She had once believed that her family's love was unconditional, but in that moment, it became clear that love had limits. Limits defined by wealth, status, and position. But she had also learned something else in the time she had spent with Idris. She had learned that love was more than material wealth. It was in the quiet moments they shared, in the strength they had found in each other. She wasn't going to let that go, not for gold, not for comfort. "I'm not leaving him," Amina said, her voice unwavering. "I've made my choice. I can't go back to that life, not now, not after everything I've learned. I'm with Idris, and this is my future." Her father's face twisted with frustration. "You don't know what you're saying. You're throwing away everything for this illusion." "It's not an illusion," she shot back, her gaze steady, her heart strong. "He's not just a man without wealth. He has a destiny, a responsibility that I will share with him." Idris, who had been silently watching from the corner of the room, now stepped forward. His eyes met Amina's, and in that moment, there was a silent understanding between them. He turned to face Amina's family, his posture unyielding. "I've chosen my path, and Amina is part of it. I won't leave her behind, not for anyone," he said, his voice calm but filled with determination. "My past may be full of shadows, but I won't run from it anymore. I'm ready to face whatever comes, with Amina by my side." The room fell silent as Farida and Amina's father exchanged a look. It was clear they didn't understand, didn't approve, but it didn't matter. Amina had already made her decision. She knew the path ahead wouldn't be easy, but she had no illusions about what lay before them. She had already chosen her destiny, and it was with Idris. "I'm sorry, Father," she said, her voice soft yet firm. "I can't go back. This is my life now." The tension in the room was unbearable. Her father's face was cold, his eyes narrowing in disappointment, while Farida's lips curled in a sneer. "You'll regret this," her father muttered, his words bitter as he turned away. "You will never be welcome in this house again." With that, they left, their footsteps echoing down the path, leaving Amina and Idris standing together, the weight of the decision now fully settled between them. In the quiet that followed, Amina turned to Idris, her heart heavy but resolute. "What now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Idris took her hand, his grip steady. "Now we walk forward, together. We leave behind the life we knew, and we step into the life we're meant to have." Amina nodded, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. She had made her choice, and while it was difficult, she knew it was the right one. The life she had once known, wealth, comfort, the power of her family, was behind her now. But the life she had ahead of her, a life with Idris, a life rooted in love, purpose, and shared destiny, was a future worth fighting for. As they walked away from the village, leaving behind her father's estate and her stepmother's scorn, Amina felt something stir within her, a deep sense of purpose. The riches of her family paled in comparison to the wealth she had found in her new life. She wasn't wealthy in gold, but she was rich in love, in strength, and in the promise of a shared destiny with the man who had always been by her side, even when she hadn't understood his true worth. And as the sun set on their journey, Amina realized that true wealth wasn't in the treasures of the world. It was in the strength of the bond they shared, the love they would nurture, and the destiny they would face together, no matter what challenges lay ahead. As Amina and Idris walked hand in hand away from the village, the world around them seemed to transform with each step. The heavy weight of her family's expectations had been lifted, and the burden of living a life defined by wealth and status was behind her. The road ahead was uncertain, but with Idris by her side, it no longer seemed daunting. Together, they were embarking on a journey that was as much about discovery as it was about destiny. Their destination was a distant land, a place where Idris's past could no longer haunt him, where he could embrace his true role and purpose. It wasn't a life of luxury or comfort that awaited them, but it was one rich in possibilities. Amina had come to understand that the true treasures of life weren't found in gold or grand estates. They were found in the strength of love, the depth of shared purpose, and the courage to face the unknown together. As they settled into their new life, Amina felt a profound transformation within herself. She was no longer the young woman who had been forced into a marriage for political gain. She had grown wiser, stronger, and more self-aware. Her past, though it had been filled with comfort and privilege, had not prepared her for the most important lesson of all, that the measure of a person was not in their wealth, but in their character, their choices, and the love they gave and received. With Idris, she had discovered a life of meaning. The trials they faced together only strengthened their bond. And as they built their future, Amina found that she was no longer torn between two worlds. She had chosen a path of love, of self-discovery, and of shared destiny. The story of Amina and Idris is a reminder that our lives are shaped not by the wealth we inherit, but by the choices we make. True richness comes from within, from the strength of character, the depth of love, and the courage to step into the unknown. No matter the circumstances, love can transform even the most difficult paths into journeys of hope and fulfillment. And as Amina looked at Idris, her heart full of gratitude for the life they were creating together, she knew that this was only the beginning. A new chapter had begun, one where love and destiny would guide them forward side by side.